poor rancher saved two giant Apache sisters, and their chief came with a shocking decision. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. It was a hot, dry afternoon on a ranch nestled deep in the rugged lands of the American West. The land stretched out endlessly, dotted with scrub brush and distant hills, the sun beating down hard on the lone rancher. This rancher, a man named Jack, had lived most of his life in isolation, tending to cattle and living by his own rules. For years, he had avoided the bustling towns and the noisy world beyond his small farm. His only company was the wind, his dog, and the occasional visitor, but that was a rare occurrence. Jack had built his life from the ground up, a man of few words, but his heart was kind. Despite his rugged exterior, he had a deep sense of right and wrong, and when he saw someone in need, he couldn't turn his back. One evening, as he was preparing to call it a day and head back to his small cabin, he noticed two figures in the distance. At first, he thought they were just travelers passing by, but as they got closer, he could see that they were two women, Apache women. They looked out of place in the dry, unforgiving desert landscape. Their clothes were torn, and they appeared exhausted, their steps slow and labored. One of them was limping, her leg clearly injured. Without hesitation, Jack grabbed his horse and made his way toward them. He had learned long ago that you never left someone stranded in the desert, especially not if they were in trouble. The two women, though clearly wary of him at first, seemed relieved when he reached them. The taller one, who appeared to be in her late 20s, spoke first, her voice rough from exhaustion. "We need help," she said, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and desperation. "My sister is injured, and we have nowhere else to turn." Jack didn't ask questions. He simply nodded and motioned for them to follow him to his cabin. It wasn't much, but it was shelter, and that was all he could offer. As they reached his cabin, he helped the injured woman inside and made her comfortable. Jack's small ranch was nothing fancy, just a modest cabin with a fireplace, a couple of chairs, and a worn-out rug on the floor, but it was enough for them to rest and recover. Over the next few days, Jack tended to their needs, providing food and water. The two women, whom Jack learned were sisters, introduced themselves as Miko and Naya. Miko, the one who had been injured, had a deep gash on her leg that needed stitching, but the rest of her injuries were minor. Naya, on the other hand, was physically fine, but emotionally, she seemed broken. Jack wasn't sure what had brought them so far out into the desert, but he didn't press them for details. He could tell by the way they spoke that they had seen hardship far beyond what most could endure. As the days passed, Jack began to feel a sense of unease. There was something about the two women, especially Naya, that made him feel like they were more than just wanderers. Their presence had an aura of mystery, and Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were hiding something. But he kept his suspicions to himself, choosing instead to focus on helping them heal and regain their strength. Little did he know, this decision would change his life forever. As the days went by, Jack continued to care for Miko and Naya, the two Apache sisters, as they slowly regained their strength. Jack had kept his distance from them emotionally, preferring to focus on getting them back on their feet rather than delving into their past. He had learned that sometimes it was better not to ask too many questions, especially when people were clearly hiding something. But Naya's quiet demeanor, her haunted eyes, and Miko's occasional lapses into feverish muttering kept Jack wondering what brought them to his doorstep. It was clear they weren't just ordinary travelers, but he had no idea how far the story would go. One evening, after Jack had helped Miko bandage her wounds and the two sisters had settled into the small cabin for the night, a faint sound reached Jack's ears. At first, he thought it was the wind, but as the sound grew louder, he realized it was the distant pounding of hooves. The sound sent a shiver down his spine. It wasn't common for riders to come this way, especially this late in the evening. Jack quickly stepped outside, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle he kept by the door. The hooves grew closer, the sound unmistakable now. It wasn't just one rider, but several. Jack's heart raced as he scanned the horizon. The night had fallen silent except for the steady rhythm of the approaching horses. He could see the figures emerging from the shadows, their silhouettes growing larger as they neared. As the riders came into view, Jack's pulse quickened. They weren't just ordinary travelers. They were Apache warriors, mounted and moving with the discipline of a tribe. They were led by a man who had a commanding presence, his face painted in the traditional war paint of his people. His eyes, sharp and calculating, fixed on Jack as the group stopped just a few yards away from his cabin. Jack's grip tightened on his rifle, but he didn't raise it. The Apache leader spoke first, his voice deep and resonant. "We have come for the sisters," he said. Jack felt a knot form in his stomach. He had been expecting something like this, but he wasn't prepared for it. "They belong to my tribe," the leader continued, his eyes never leaving Jack's. "Their father entrusted them to the land of the living. We are here to ensure they are safe." The words felt like a warning. There was something in the air, something Jack couldn't quite put his finger on. The warriors behind the leader remained silent, their hands resting on their weapons but not yet drawing them. Jack could feel the tension rising, like the calm before a storm. He stepped forward cautiously, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of unease. "They're not going anywhere," Jack said, his gaze shifting to Miko and Naya who had appeared in the doorway, their faces pale as they watched the group of warriors. The Apache leader raised an eyebrow, seemingly unfazed by Jack's defiance. "And why is that?" he asked, his voice quiet but filled with a weight that made Jack uneasy. "Because they've already found a home here," Jack said, his voice firming. "I've given them shelter, food, and care, and I don't intend to turn them away." There was a long pause as the Apache leader studied Jack with an intensity that made him feel as though his very soul was being examined. Then, without a word, the leader dismounted from his horse. He walked up to Jack slowly, his boots crunching on the dry earth with each step. As he reached Jack, he stopped and looked him directly in the eyes. "You are a man of honor," the leader said, his voice surprisingly soft. "But you do not understand what you are involving yourself in." Jack frowned, confusion clouding his thoughts. "I don't need to understand. They're safe here." The leader nodded, as if Jack's words had confirmed something he already knew. "Very well," he said, "but you will soon understand. The bond between our people is stronger than you realize. The debt owed for saving these sisters is more than you could imagine." With that, the leader turned and motioned for his warriors to follow him. They rode off into the night as silently as they had come, leaving Jack standing there, the weight of the words he had just heard pressing heavily on his chest. Jack turned back to the cabin, his mind racing. What debt? What bond? And what did the Apache leader mean by those words? As the moon rose high above the desert, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that his life, the quiet life he had worked so hard to build, was about to be upended in ways he couldn't possibly understand. The following days were filled with an uneasy silence. Jack went about his usual tasks, tending to the cattle and working around the ranch, but his mind constantly returned to the conversation he had with the Apache leader. What did he mean by the bond between their people? And why did he feel the weight of those words so strongly? Miko and Naya were still recovering from their injuries, though Miko's wound had begun to heal nicely. Jack continued to provide for them, but the air around the cabin was thick with tension. The sisters were quiet, their once confident demeanor now replaced with a cautious unease. It was clear that they, too, were waiting for something. As the sun began to set one evening, Jack was finishing up his chores when he saw Miko and Naya step out of the cabin. They were standing at the edge of the porch, looking out over the land, their expressions thoughtful. Jack couldn't help but feel a pang of worry. He knew something was coming. He walked over to them, his boots crunching on the dry earth as he approached. "You both okay?" he asked, his voice gentle but filled with concern. Miko turned to him, her eyes meeting his with a quiet intensity. "We are fine," she said softly, but Jack could tell she wasn't being entirely honest. Naya spoke next, her voice low and hesitant. "The chief will come for us," she said, her words carrying an eerie finality. "You don't understand what you've done." Jack furrowed his brow, confused. "What do you mean? I've only helped you both." Miko's gaze softened slightly. "It's not that simple. The chief, he is a powerful man. He holds sway over much of the land, and the bond he spoke of, it is not just for us. It is for our entire people." Naya took a step forward, her eyes serious. "Your actions, They have bound you to us now, and there will be consequences. Jack's heart skipped a beat. What kind of consequences? He asked, his voice growing more tense. Naya met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. The chief has chosen you. He will not let you go now. You are part of the tribe's future, whether you want it or not. Jack's mind raced, his pulse quickening. I'm just a rancher, he said, his voice thick with disbelief. Why would he choose me? What do I have to do with any of this? Miko stepped closer, placing a hand on Jack's arm. You saved us, she said softly, her voice filled with a mixture of gratitude and something else, something deeper. You didn't just save two sisters. You saved our future. Jack stared at her, struggling to comprehend what she meant. Before he could respond, the sound of horses' hooves echoed in the distance. The riders were coming again. This time, it wasn't a handful of warriors, but a full tribe, making their way toward the ranch. Jack's stomach clenched. He had known this day would come, but now that it was here, he wasn't sure what to expect. The riders arrived just before dusk, their horses kicking up a cloud of dust as they approached the cabin. Jack stepped outside, his heart pounding in his chest. The Apache leader was at the front of the group, his expression unreadable as he rode toward Jack. The warriors behind him dismounted silently, forming a circle around the ranch, their eyes focused on Jack. The leader looked Jack up and down, as if assessing him. You have done a great thing, the leader said, his voice deep and commanding. But you are not free of your debt. Jack's throat went dry. What debt? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The leader smiled, though it was a cold smile, one that sent a shiver down Jack's spine. You have saved our daughters. Now, you will stand with us. You will fight with us when the time comes. Jack's mind reeled. Fight with them? He had no idea what this man was talking about. But before he could respond, the leader's voice rang out again. The bond is sealed. You are one of us now. Jack stood there, frozen, as the realization hit him. The quiet life he had built, the isolation he had sought, was gone. He was bound to the Apache tribe now, whether he liked it or not. As the night settled in and the warriors made camp around his property, Jack's thoughts raced. What had he gotten himself into? And what would his future hold now that he was part of something far larger than he had ever imagined? He couldn't know yet, but one thing was certain. His life had changed forever. As Jack stood there, the Apache leader's words echoed in his mind. You are one of us now. The weight of those words settled on him like a heavy stone. The quiet life he had known, the solitude he had cherished, was no more. Now, he was part of something much larger, a life he had never asked for. The warriors moved silently around his ranch, setting up camp, while the leader, whose name Jack still didn't know, made himself comfortable by the fire. Jack's mind raced, but his body stood frozen, unable to move or speak. The Apache chief had just declared him part of the tribe, a bond that could never be broken, no matter how much Jack resisted it. He had saved the two sisters, yes, but what had he gotten himself into? What did this debt really mean? The silence stretched between them until Jack finally found his voice. I never asked for this, he said, his words low but firm. The leader turned his head slowly, his eyes locking onto Jack's. There was no anger in his gaze, only the weight of centuries of tradition. You saved our daughters, the leader said, his voice calm, almost soothing. You saved them, and now we are bound together. That is the way of our people. The bond is not one of choice. It is one of duty. Jack swallowed hard, the knot in his stomach growing tighter. What do you expect of me? He asked, his voice hoarse. The leader leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving Jack's. In time, you will know what is required, he said cryptically. But for now, you will be given a place among us. You will be protected, but you will also be expected to stand when the time comes. When the battles arrive, you will fight alongside us. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. He wasn't a fighter. He had never been one for violence, not like these Apache warriors who seemed to breathe it. But what could he do? He had already been swept up in something much bigger than himself. He had no choice but to accept it, at least for now. The warriors began to settle down for the night, their campfires casting long shadows across the land. Jack turned and walked back into his cabin, his mind spinning. Miko and Naya were waiting inside, their faces unreadable. The air between them was thick with unspoken words. Jack had never felt more like a stranger in his own home. He sat down at the table, rubbing his hands over his face, trying to make sense of it all. What have I gotten myself into? He muttered to himself. Naya, who had been silent up until now, spoke softly. You have become part of our tribe, she said, her voice carrying a weight of finality. There is no turning back from that. You saved us, and now you must understand the responsibility that comes with it. Jack looked up at her, his heart heavy. But I'm not like you, he said. I don't belong to this world. I'm just a rancher. Naya's eyes softened, and she took a step closer. It is not about who you were before, she said quietly. It is about who you choose to be now. The bond you share with us is not just one of blood, but one of honor. You will have a choice, Jack. You can walk away, but the world you know will never be the same. Or you can stand with us and fight to protect what we have. The choice is yours. Jack felt the weight of her words sink in. He had saved them, yes, but he hadn't known what he was truly getting into. There was no turning back now. As the night wore on, Jack lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He had never asked for any of this. Yet here he was, bound to a people he barely understood, with a debt that could never be repaid. What would the future hold for him? What did the Apache leader mean by the battles to come? And how would he ever find a way to fit into this new world he had been thrust into? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps outside. He rose from the bed and went to the door, his heart pounding in his chest. When he opened it, he found Naya standing in the doorway, her face serious. Come with me, she said, her voice low. Jack hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. He followed her outside, where the cool night air wrapped around him like a shroud. Naya led him to the campfire, where the Apache warriors sat, waiting. The leader was there, too, watching him carefully. You are ready, the leader said. The time has come for you to learn what it means to stand with us. You will begin your training tomorrow. Jack's stomach turned. He had no idea what kind of training this would be, but he knew one thing for certain. It was the beginning of a new chapter in his life. And there was no going back. The morning after the Apache leader's announcement, Jack found himself outside, standing before a small group of Apache warriors who were waiting for him. They were silent, their eyes keenly studying him, as if they could read the very essence of his being. The Apache leader was nowhere to be seen, but Jack could sense his presence looming over the group. He was not only part of the tribe now, but he had been tasked with something more, training for a life he never imagined. The thought of it weighed heavily on him. This is it, Jack thought to himself. The point of no return. The warriors didn't speak immediately. They simply watched him, letting the silence stretch longer than Jack was comfortable with. It was as though they were waiting for him to make a move. After a few tense moments, one of them, a tall man with weathered skin and a hardened gaze, approached Jack. You will learn quickly, or you will not learn at all, the man said gruffly. The words stung, but Jack knew they were true. He wasn't here to play games. The time for hesitation was over. With a steady nod, Jack followed the man as he turned to walk toward a group of horses. It was time to begin his training. For the next several weeks, Jack spent his days learning the ways of the Apache. The warriors taught him the art of tracking, of reading the land, of moving silently through the wilderness. It wasn't easy. Jack wasn't used to the rough terrain or the constant physical strain. Every day felt like a battle with his own body as much as with the environment around him. But the Apache were relentless. They never showed mercy, pushing him to his limits. Every time he stumbled or faltered, they would quietly watch, waiting for him to get back up. And so he did. As the days passed, Jack became more adept. He learned how to navigate through the dense forests, how to read the subtle signs left by animals, and how to move with the quiet grace of the Apache. But the true test came when they took him on a hunt. The Apache didn't hunt like the settlers did. They didn't use rifles and traps. Instead, they relied on their instincts, their knowledge of the land, and their swift, deadly precision. Jack was nervous, but he kept his fears in check. He had to prove to himself that he could do this. The hunt was grueling. For hours, they tracked a herd of wild deer through the thick brush, barely making a sound as they moved. Jack's legs ached, his lungs burned from the exertion, but he kept going, knowing that he couldn't afford to fail. After what seemed like an eternity, they finally found their target. The Apache leader, who had joined them on the hunt, gave Jack a brief nod. It was his turn. The leader handed Jack a bow and a single arrow. Take the shot, he said, his voice steady and calm. Jack took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never hunted with a bow before. He had no idea if he could make the shot, but he had no choice. With trembling hands, he drew the arrow back, his eyes locked on the deer. He could feel the weight of the moment, the eyes of the entire tribe on him. The world seemed to slow down. For a brief instant, everything else disappeared. And then, with a sharp release, the arrow flew. It struck the deer cleanly, just behind the shoulder. The animal staggered for a moment before it collapsed. Jack stood there, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his body still tense from the effort. He had done it. The tribe watched in silence, their faces unreadable. For a moment, Jack feared he had failed somehow, that they would dismiss him as nothing more than a fool. But then the leader nodded, a small but approving gesture. "You have passed the first test," the leader said. Jack's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and pride. It wasn't just about the hunt. It was about proving himself, showing that he could survive in this new world. But even as Jack savored his small victory, he knew that this was only the beginning. The Apache were not interested in half measures. There would be more challenges ahead, and he would have to rise to meet them. And yet, as he stood there, watching the warriors skin the deer, Jack couldn't help but feel a strange sense of belonging. In this harsh world, in this unfamiliar life, he had found something he hadn't expected, a purpose. And for the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. As the days passed, Jack's training continued, each day pushing him further into the world of the Apache. He had learned to track, hunt, and move silently, but there was still so much to learn. The Apache had a way of life that was built on respect, patience, and a deep connection to the land. Jack's time with the tribe had changed him. He was beginning to understand that survival was not just about physical strength. It was about mindset, about living in harmony with nature and trusting the people around you. However, despite the progress he had made, Jack knew that there was something looming over him, something he could not avoid forever. His bond with the tribe had not come without its cost. The chief's earlier words echoed in his mind. The debt is not paid. Jack had helped Miko and Naya, but what would be expected of him in return? One evening, as Jack was cleaning his rifle after another day of training, Naya approached him. Her face was serious, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight as she stood in the doorway of the cabin. "Jack," she said quietly, her voice carrying a weight he had not heard before. "The chief has spoken. You have shown you can survive. But now you must prove your loyalty to the tribe." Jack stood, wiping his hands on his shirt, his pulse quickening. "What do you mean? I've been helping, training, hunting, doing everything you've asked. What more do I need to prove?" Naya stepped closer, her expression unreadable. "It's not about what you've done already, Jack. It's about what is coming. The tribe is preparing for battle." Jack felt a cold shiver run down his spine. "Battle? What do you mean?" Naya's gaze hardened, her voice dropping. "The chief has heard of the settlers coming to claim this land. They are encroaching on our territory, and they will not stop until they take what they want." Jack's mind raced. He had heard rumors about land disputes, but he had never expected to be involved in something like this. "And you want me to fight? To stand with you?" Jack asked, his voice heavy with disbelief. Naya nodded. "The chief has chosen you. You are one of us now. The land, the tribe, the future, it's all tied to you now. You will fight, or you will leave." Jack's chest tightened. This was not the life he had chosen. This was not the peaceful existence he had sought in the wilds of the American West. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that leaving was not an option. The bond had been made. His fate was tied to the Apache, and he could not walk away. The next morning, the tribe gathered around the fire, the air thick with tension. The chief stood at the front, his eyes scanning the group. There was no more room for doubt. The time for action had come. "Today, we defend our land," the chief said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had lived through many battles. "We fight for our people, for our future." Jack stood with the others, his hands sweaty as he tightened his grip on his bow. The warriors around him seemed calm, but Jack could see the fire in their eyes. They were ready. As they rode toward the encroaching settlers, Jack's mind raced. How would he fare in his first real test? Would he be able to keep up with the Apache warriors, or would he fail them? The ride seemed endless, the sun high overhead, the dust swirling beneath the horses' hooves. As they approached the settlers' camp, Jack could feel the weight of the moment pressing on him. The Apache chief gave the signal, and the warriors dismounted, moving swiftly into position. Jack followed their lead, trying to match their movements, but his heart was pounding in his chest. This was no longer just about survival. This was about defending everything the tribe stood for. The confrontation was swift. The settlers had no idea what hit them. The Apache warriors moved like shadows, silent and deadly. Jack followed Naya, staying close to her as she led the charge. His bow felt heavier than it ever had before, and the tension in the air was almost unbearable. But Jack pushed it all aside, focusing only on the task at hand. When the first settler fell, Jack's stomach churned. This was real. The fight was not some distant idea. It was here, in front of him, and he was a part of it. The battle lasted longer than Jack expected. The Apache fought with precision, each warrior moving as part of a greater whole, and Jack found himself in the midst of it. At one point, he found himself face to face with a settler, a man who looked just as frightened as Jack felt. The man raised his rifle, but Jack was faster. He let the arrow fly, the tension in his body releasing as it struck its target. The man fell, and Jack stood frozen for a moment, his breath coming in ragged gasps. It was over. The settlers had been pushed back, but Jack didn't feel victorious. He felt empty, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. The Apache chief stood before him, watching him closely. "You fought well," the chief said, his voice low. Jack could only nod, unable to find words. He had done what was required, but at what cost? He had crossed a line, one he could never uncross. He was no longer just a rancher. He was a warrior, and there was no turning back. The days that followed the battle were a mix of silence and reflection. Jack sat in the corner of his cabin, his thoughts far from the usual tasks of ranch life. The thrill of the fight had faded, leaving behind a heavy sense of duty. The Apache tribe had defended their land, but Jack knew that the threat wasn't over. This was just the beginning. The chief had made it clear. The settlers weren't going to stop coming. They would keep pushing, and the Apache would be forced to keep defending. Jack's role in this world had shifted, and there was no going back. He had saved 2 Apache sisters, but now, he was part of the tribe. The bond between them was stronger than just an alliance of convenience. It was a bond forged in battle, in blood, and in shared survival. He could no longer see himself as a lone rancher. The Apache were his people now, and he had a responsibility to them. As Jack walked through the camp the next morning, the faces of the warriors he had fought alongside seemed different to him. There was respect in their eyes, but there was something else as well: expectation. They knew he had proven himself in battle, but now, he had to prove that he was worthy of the life he had been given. The chief approached him, his face expressionless as always. "The battle was won, but the war is not over," the chief said, his voice low and steady. "You have fought with us, and now you must lead with us." Jack felt a weight settle on his chest. "Lead?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. "I'm just a rancher. I don't know anything about leadership." The chief nodded slowly. "Leadership is not about power. It is about responsibility. You have earned your place among us, Jack. It is time you learn how to lead." Jack's stomach tightened. The idea of leadership was foreign to him. He had spent his life in solitude, living by his own rules, with no one to answer to. But the chief was right. If he was truly part of the tribe, he had a duty to help guide them. "What do you need me to do?" Jack asked, his voice steady despite the nerves twisting in his gut. The chief's eyes narrowed slightly, as if weighing Jack's commitment. "There will be another attack. This time, they will bring more men, more weapons. We will need to be prepared. I want you to help train the younger warriors. Show them what you have learned. The battle tactics, the bow, the ways of survival." Jack nodded slowly, the weight of the responsibility sinking in. "I'll do it," he said, his voice firm. Over the next few days, Jack worked tirelessly with the young warriors. He taught them how to track, how to move silently through the land, and how to use the bow with precision. The Apache had their own ways, their own traditions, but Jack's experience as a rancher gave him a unique perspective on survival. It wasn't long before the young warriors began to respect him not only for his skills in battle, but for his ability to teach. As Jack trained the next generation, he realized that the responsibility he had feared was not as burdensome as he had once thought. The young warriors were eager to learn, and through them, Jack could feel the sense of unity growing. He was no longer just an outsider looking in. He was a part of something much larger than himself. The tribe began to rely on him, not just for his skills, but for his leadership. And that realization hit Jack harder than any battle. The weight of the tribe's future rested on his shoulders. He had once believed that survival was about living alone, about facing the world on his own terms. But he was learning that survival was about community, about standing together and fighting for something greater than yourself. As the days passed, the tribe's preparations grew more intense. The young warriors trained harder, their movements becoming more coordinated, more confident. And Jack, for the first time in his life, felt like he was truly where he was supposed to be. But even as the tribe prepared for the inevitable conflict, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something far greater than just a battle with settlers. The chief had spoken of a bond, a debt that Jack had yet to understand fully. As the sun set one evening, casting long shadows across the camp, the chief called Jack to his tent. When Jack entered, the chief was sitting by a fire, his face shadowed by the flickering light. "There is more to this than you know," the chief said quietly, his voice carrying a sense of urgency. "The settlers are not the only threat we face. There are other forces at play, forces that will test everything we've worked for." Jack's heart raced. "What forces?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The chief's eyes met his, piercing and full of something ancient. "The future of our people is in your hands, Jack. You have been chosen for a reason. The time will come when you must face the truth of the bond you have made." Jack felt his stomach tighten as the weight of the chief's words settled over him. The battles ahead were not just for land or survival. They were for the very soul of the Apache people. And Jack would have to fight not just for them, but for everything he had come to care about. The days turned into weeks, and the tension within the Apache camp grew with each passing day. Jack had taken his place among the warriors, teaching them the ways of survival, but a lingering sense of unease still haunted him. Despite the training, despite the preparations, something deep within him told him that the true test was yet to come. The chief's cryptic words from the night before echoed in his mind. "The future of our people is in your hands, Jack." Jack had been chosen, but for what? And what was the true nature of the bond that had been forged between him and the Apache? He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the chief's words, something he hadn't fully grasped. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, casting the land in an amber glow, Jack sat by the fire with Miko and Naya. The sisters had been quiet lately, their usual confidence replaced by a quiet, almost somber mood. Jack knew that they, too, were waiting for something. "Jack," Miko said softly, breaking the silence. "The time is coming. You need to understand the full weight of what you've done." Jack looked at her, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean? I've helped. I've trained. I've fought. What more is there?" Naya spoke up, her voice carrying a sense of urgency that sent a chill down Jack's spine. "It's not just about fighting, Jack. It's about leadership. You've been chosen to lead us through what is coming. But you must accept the responsibility that comes with it." Jack felt a heavy weight settle on his shoulders. "Lead you? I'm just a rancher. I don't know anything about leadership. I never wanted any of this." Miko's eyes softened as she placed a hand on his arm. "You don't have to want it, Jack. Sometimes, the world chooses you, whether you're ready or not. The chief has seen something in you. The tribe needs you, and you must lead us to protect our way of life." The words hit Jack harder than any arrow ever could. He had thought that his bond with the Apache was about survival, but now he was being asked to lead them, to stand at the forefront of a future that was still uncertain. It was a responsibility he hadn't asked for, but one he knew he couldn't ignore. The next morning, the chief gathered the tribe around the fire. Jack stood beside him, feeling the weight of the tribe's eyes on him. The chief's gaze was steady as he addressed the warriors. "The settlers will not stop," the chief said, his voice calm but filled with authority. "They will come again, and we must be ready. Our way of life is at risk, and we must fight to protect it." The tribe murmured in agreement, their faces resolute. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he realized that the moment had come. This was no longer just about defending the land. This was about the future of the Apache, and he was now part of that future. The chief turned to Jack, his eyes piercing. "You have learned much, Jack," he said, his voice low. "But now, you must lead us. You must show us what you have learned, not just in battle, but in life. The tribe will follow you, if you have the courage to lead." Jack swallowed hard. The chief's words were clear, but they carried an immense burden. Led? Led them where? What did it mean to be a leader in a world so uncertain? Jack had never considered himself a leader. He was just a man who had been thrown into a situation far beyond his control. But the time had come to accept his role, whether he was ready or not. "I will do it," Jack said, his voice steady, though his heart was racing. "I will lead." The tribe watched him closely, their expressions filled with expectation. In that moment, Jack realized that the choice had never truly been his. The bond had been forged, and now it was up to him to carry it forward. The days that followed were a blur of preparation. Jack worked alongside the chief, the warriors, and the other members of the tribe, learning what it meant to lead. It wasn't just about strategy or tactics. It was about understanding the needs of the people, about standing firm in the face of danger, and about having the courage to make decisions that would affect the lives of everyone in the tribe. Jack found himself in countless discussions, making decisions he had never thought he would have to make. The weight of leadership was heavy, but it was also clear. The tribe needed someone to guide them, to keep them united, and Jack had been chosen to do that. As the days passed, Jack felt himself changing. The uncertainty that had once plagued him began to fade, replaced by a sense of purpose. He wasn't just a rancher anymore. He was a leader of the Apache, and the tribe was counting on him. But even as Jack embraced his new role, he couldn't shake the feeling that something much larger was at play. The settlers, the land, the tribe, everything was connected, and Jack had a feeling that the greatest challenge was yet to come. The days turned to weeks, and Jack found himself in a role he had never anticipated. As the tribe's new leader, his responsibilities weighed heavily on his shoulders. The Apache had always relied on their leaders to guide them, to make the right decisions in times of crisis. And now, that burden was his. The settlers' threat had not gone away. They were pushing further into Apache territory, and Jack knew that another battle was imminent. He had trained with the warriors, fought beside them, and learned what it meant to be one of them. But leadership required something more than skill in battle. It required wisdom, vision, and the ability to make choices that would affect the lives of everyone in the tribe. As Jack stood at the front of the tribe, the warriors gathered around him. He realized that he was no longer the outsider. The Apache were his people now, and he was ready to lead them. The decision was made. They would confront the settlers head-on, but they would do so strategically, with the strength and unity they had cultivated over the months of training. Jack had no illusions. This would be a difficult battle, and there would be losses. But he had seen the resilience of the Apache, and he knew that they would fight with everything they had. The night before the battle, Jack stood alone, looking out over the land that had become his home. The wind was calm, and the stars above shone brightly in the clear sky. It was a peaceful moment, one that seemed out of place in the midst of the impending conflict. But Jack knew that peace, in their world, was fleeting. The next morning, the Apache warriors gathered, their faces solemn but determined. Jack addressed them, his voice steady and filled with conviction. "We fight not just for our land, but for our future," he said. "We will stand together, as one, and we will protect everything we hold dear. This is our time to show the world who we are." The warriors responded with a unified cheer, their spirits lifted by Jack's words. The tribe was ready. The battle was fierce. The settlers, though larger in number, were no match for the Apache warriors' agility and strategy. Jack led the charge, moving swiftly through the battlefield, guiding his people with a newfound sense of purpose. The fight seemed endless, the sounds of battle echoing across the land. But in the end, the Apache emerged victorious. The settlers were driven back, their plans thwarted. The tribe had held its ground, and Jack had proven himself as a leader. As the dust settled and the wounded were tended to, Jack stood beside the chief, watching the warriors return to the camp. The chief's eyes met his, filled with respect. "You have done well, Jack," the chief said, his voice low but sincere. "You have earned your place among us." Jack nodded, his chest swelling with a mix of pride and relief. He had led the tribe to victory, but he knew that the fight was far from over. There would be more battles, more challenges, but for the first time since he had arrived in the Apache camp, Jack felt a sense of peace. He was no longer just a rancher. He was a leader, and the Apache were his people. As the sun set over the battlefield, Jack felt the weight of his responsibility, but it was no longer a burden. It was a calling, one he would carry with honor for as long as the tribe needed him. The bond had been forged, and now it was time to protect it. The future of the Apache was uncertain, but Jack knew that with his people by his side, they would face whatever came with strength, unity, and courage.